this month's tutorial, we're gonna do a fun black and white / grayscale take on watercolor lettering. So we'll be making this inky piece together. We will be using brushes for my watercolor lettering kit. If you have other brushes that will work for watercolor, you could give them a try. I'm not sure if you'll get the exact same effect, but you can probably get close. So I'm gonna walk you through this project step by step. If you zoom in, you can see all those great little watery details. We'll draw in some drips and then use some stamps to add some splashes and the watercolor hearts. On the blog, as usual, there is just a little reference sheet that gives you the basic lettering. You can always screenshot this off the PDF and trace it if you want to for this tutorial. That is the brushes we'll be using. This is the grayscale color palette, so you can down that in a Procreate format on the blog. And then I have the project at the top just so you can look at it while you're working. So grab your iPad and Apple Pencil and let's get started. I have my letters already drawn out in a sketch finalized form, but I wanted to show you how I'd approach something like this from the beginning. So what I'm going to do is just grab, this is the color palette we'll work with, but you could use just, any grays. I just use this one a lot when I'm working in black and white and grayscale. And then let's go ahead and go to the watercolor kit. I'm gonna use the clean lettering brush. And then you can either draw your guidelines in and make straight lines, or you can tap the wrench tool and turn on your drawing guide. And then you could always edit the drawing guide and you can change the grid size. I'm gonna go about there. So I'm at 127 point right there. And then you can change the color of the lines by picking colors up here. So I'm gonna make mine blue, tap done, and now I can see what I'm working with. I'll take my sketch and kind of tap it into place. Although at this point I usually would not have a sketch, but you can see how the letters fit right in there. So that's what I had originally used to draw these letters out. So now on a new layer, I would start by drawing my side lines. And I wanted this to come out, my serifs, these lines down here to come out all the same. So I picked a brush size. I'm at around 10%. And if I want to remember that brush size, I can tap my plus and then it'll give me a little line so I can remember that. And then again, if we hold our pencil down on the page and draw, we get a nice straight line. So I usually draw 2 lines like that, 1 line along the bottom, and then just kind of gently connect them with a slight curve. I'm gonna undo that with a 2-finger tap and get in closer. And then I usually draw, you can adjust your paper as needed, my top curve, and then fill with color. Now I'm gonna use something very similar on the end. So a lot of times what I'll do is duplicate, drag it over, especially if I don't have my template yet and I'm just working on getting the letters formed and want to keep them consistent. And then I would click freeform here and drag this up. Now this won't be my final letter, but can you see how that distorts the bottom then? So sometimes that doesn't work as well, but if you're just trying to get your basic letters down and you want everything the same size, you can kind of use different pieces over and over again. The other way you can do it to keep your letters consistent is to take a different color, like a hot pink or purple, make sure you're on a new layer, and then you can draw a line like that, or even a dot. And then if I fill that and bring it over, adjust the size a wee bit, make sure I'm on uniform here. Okay, and now what I would do is drag that dot over and then add a new layer, take my dark color again, and then I would start drawing, keeping my lines and width consistent with that dot. And then you can just keep dragging that dot all around and getting your letters in place, and then always staying on that same brush size will give you those consistent serif widths. And you can try, as we've shown in past videos, as I've shown in past videos, you can try using the arc tool to get nice smooth lines. That worked really well right there. So then I'd bring that all the way down, do my little curve for my serif, keep going throughout till I get my whole thing lettered. Oh, that one didn't work quite as well. Sometimes you just have to freehand it. And then once I fill it in, I can go back and smooth out lines. So I've got my N on that layer. I didn't finish my I, so for that I would draw an arc and see if I can get that to auto work. That worked pretty well. And then just come in and freehand this part. And then for the drips, actually, I need to touch this up a little. I'm gonna make that a smoother curve. And again, this is just our sketch phase, so it doesn't have to be too perfect because we'll actually trace it one more time after we get our sketch down. So it's better if you're actually not tracing my lettering this time so you can learn how to do the letters on your own, especially if you wanted to do a different word. So drips are usually bigger at the bottom, so I just kind of shape them to look like they're actually dripping and then fill them in. So I would go through and do this with all my letters until I have them all done. So let's just pretend I got them all done. This is the point that I'm at. So there's still some, you can see from my sketch, there's still some rough lines. So what I would do after I get them all in place and I'm happy with them, I would merge them into one layer like this. I would tap and rename it sketch. And then we don't need our dot anymore since we've got our letters all done. And then I would start going over one more time and really perfecting those letters and getting everything smoothed out. And I'll do everything on its own layer. So I'll end up with 4 layers, one for each letter. So go ahead and pause the video here, get your letters all drawn. You can use the same one I did. If you want to trace it just for the purposes of following along with the techniques in this video, perfectly fine. Again, to do that, all you do is open the PDF download from the blog on your iPad, take a screenshot, and then import that section as a photo into Procreate. So right here, if you're in your canvas, you can click add a photo. And if it's saved to your iPad, it's really easy to just insert and trace. So next we'll pick up with the actual technique. So pause, get your letter drawn, and I'll meet you back here to start adding our watercolor effect. So we have everything drawn in black on its own layer. I've got my sketch layer here. I don't really need that anymore, but you might want to save it. Oh, my renaming lost. Save it just in case you need to come back to it. So I usually leave it. Now we want to kind of take our, I must have a little dot somewhere. All right, let's see if I can get rid of that. All right, tap that back into place. Oh, see when you get a stray mark on your page, your eye gets small over on your board. So if you get it erased out, your eye fills that space again. But if you have a stray mark that you can't see somehow, you'll get that. So that's what I was doing. Okay, so everything is in black right now, and we really want to add a lot of different shades of the black to this. So what I'm going to do, there actually isn't a solid black in your grayscale palette. So if you want to add one, just come over to the color wheel, go to classic, and bring that black all the way to the bottom corner. And then you could add a solid black there. We're not going to use that yet though. We're going to take our 2 almost black colors. So take the darkest one and drag and drop that into your I and also your K. We're going to alternate. And then take your second light or darkest shade, I guess, and tap that into your N and your Y. And that's just going to give us some slight variation to start adding the watercolor effects. And let's go ahead now and add the watercolor background. So in the watercolor lettering kit, you have several different options here. There's a fine watercolor paper, a medium, and a coarse. So I'm going to use the medium. You can use whichever one you want. I'm going to add a new layer right here above the sketch layer and rename that paper. And what works best for this is a pretty light gray. I'm going to go with maybe that gray right there and test it out. That works pretty well. So I'm gonna go ahead and make sure you leave your pen down, otherwise you're overlapping. So put your pencil on the page and don't lift it up again until you're done coloring the whole thing. Now that's just our background. We'll add more over the top to make it look realistic later in our process. All right, so now we can get to adding some watercolor effects. So I am going to start by going a little darker. So I'm gonna grab my black color. I'm gonna go above my eye, add a new layer, and we're gonna end up coloring on it, but we want it to be only on the eye. So I'm gonna tap it and apply a clipping mask. And then I am gonna do, I think I'll start with Edge Bleed Subtle. And what I'm gonna do is just kind of come in here and go along the edges. It's a little harder to see with this dark gray, but you'll start to see the effect more when we add the watercolor paper over the top and more. So if I really zoom in, you can see that there is variation. And if you want to, you could also add some lighter variation than what you're working with and maybe try doing the Edge Bleed Saturated or the Gradient Blender. A lot of times what I like to do, if I want this dark color to bleed into this N, I'll take that dark gray and then I'll go on my N with the Gradient Blender and make it look like it's bleeding into the end until it gets just as dark as that. And again, you're gonna want to, oops, that didn't work because I didn't, you can either draw right on the N by tapping Alpha Lock, or you can do the clipping mask. In this situation, I would use the Alpha Lock because I want to be able to get it just as dark and just start to bleed a little into that letter. And I'm going to take a little darker one and do the same thing. And you can see that it looks like that letter bled into the next. So same thing from this side. I'll do a little on that. And then you're going to want to do that on your Y as well. So I'll Alpha Lock that and let that bleed, and maybe it would come over here as well. So you don't have to be super precise. You can be a little random with it. So now let's go back up to our eye. We've added some darker. If I want to add some lighter, sometimes I will add another layer and it will auto apply the clipping mask when you do it like that. And then I'll grab my Edge Bleed Saturated and maybe a lighter gray just to add some variation and kind of add some of that in as well. And then you can really start to see some more. I like to make my brush pretty big for that one. And that's what starts to give us that really watery kind of look. You see that? So I go through all my letters and do the same thing. So we've kind of completed the eye, although we may come back to it and edit it, and that's why it's nice to have so many extra layers. Now, I'm on the N, so I'll tap that, add a new layer, create that clipping mask so it stays within the N. And again, I'll grab a slightly darker color than the color of that N. And I kind of play with the different edge bleeds and the sizes until I'm really happy with how it all looks. I might make it bigger and just kind of stamp it so it looks like a pool of water, if you can see that. And they're gonna come out different every single time you do this, just like if you were working with real watercolors. And then maybe I'll grab an even darker color and grab the saturated brush. There, that gives us some nice contrast and variation there. And then again, if I wanna do lighter, I like to do it on its own layer just to give me a little more control. So you can get like pretty light with that and just don't apply a lot of pressure. See, if I go light with this, it gives me just subtle color. If I press heavy, you get a lot of, you just get a lot less control if you're not gentle with it. All right. And then maybe I want to go back to the eye and add like a water pool there in a lighter color. There. Yeah, so I'll keep going like that until I get done with all the letters, and then you'll end up, let me show you on one I've already done. So by the time you get to the end, I did this one a lot lighter. I ended up darkening it at the end, so we're starting darker this time. So you can see for each letter, I have 2 to 3 layers on top with all the watercolor effects. So that's what you want to keep doing until you get your whole piece done. And then we'll move on to adding, we're gonna end up merging the layers down just to make it easier on ourselves. And we'll add some extra effects. So once you get done with that, what I usually like to do so that I keep an older version, in this final version, you can see it's merged down. It's very simple. I have my hearts, my lettering, my paper, and my extra paper effect. Because I want to be able to come back to this version with all the layers in case I want to make edits, what I usually do several times throughout my process is swipe left and duplicate. So that way, when I come and I merge all my layers down, whoops. When you have clipping mask, you have to be careful about how you merge. So I want to merge all the I together, all the N together, all the K together, and then all the Y together, and then I can pinch them all into one. And let's say you did this like mine and yours came out too gray. You want it to be darker. All you have to do is tap the magic wand tool here. The adjustments panel pops up and you can click hue, saturation, and brightness, and you can actually just darken it with your brightness, which is what I did the first time. So you can go really dark, you can go pretty subtle. So I'm gonna go about there, just a little darker to get it a little more inky looking. I didn't like how gray it came out in the end. So finish adding all your watercolor effects like I showed you. If you need to pause the video, please feel free to do so. And then when you come back, we'll add some of the finishing details. When we're doing a video like this and I have you pause and work, it may seem like the process is short, but it actually takes quite a while. You know, we're only doing 4 letters, so it didn't take too long. But if I come over here and I get my canvas information, let's see, statistics. This project took me about an hour when I did it originally. So don't expect for it to take you, you know, if my video ends up 20 minutes, only 20 minutes to finish. It will probably take you longer. And the longer your piece is, of course, the longer it will take you. All right, pause, finish your letters, and we'll come back with our details. All right, so now you should have your whole word done with all your basic watercolor effects and have it merged into one layer like I showed you in the last segment. So now we have just 3 layers. We have our paper, we have our sketch, which is toggled off here, and then also our inky lettering. So now we're gonna start adding some extra effects. So let's go ahead and add a new layer, and let's call that splatters. And now we're gonna take the saturated splatter and I'm gonna do the almost black color. And I'm just going to play with it. That's kind of big, but I kind of like it. So I'm gonna leave it there. And you don't wanna go overboard. Less is more with the splatters for sure. So I kind of think about if I were flicking a paintbrush in real life, where would my splatters go? What's gonna help balance the piece out? So I've done saturated, and now I wanna add some subtle splatter. So you can maybe even just use the same color there. And that's just gonna add a little more variation and depth. I'm gonna make that a lot bigger. There, maybe a little right there. So again, less is more. And then that one's a little too big. Okay. Now let's go ahead and add some watercolor hearts. So we want those to actually be below our inky layer. So tap your paper layer and add a new layer, and now rename that hearts. And in my watercolor lettering kit, I have a heart that already is pre-watercolored for you, so that makes things quick and easy when you're working. So I'm just gonna put one down. That size is pretty good, so I'm not gonna adjust it. I'm just gonna tilt it into place, kind of like that. And then I'm gonna put all my hearts on separate layers for now, just to make them easier to edit and modify. So I'll add another heart. I'm gonna tap my arrow tool, make sure I'm on uniform to keep my heart in the same proportions. I'm gonna make this one a little smaller, rotate it a bit and put it right about there. And then I'm gonna add a third one. For that, I'm just gonna swipe left, click duplicate. And so you can see you get that nice overlap. I'll make that one a little smaller too. And maybe change the angle a wee bit. just like that. And now I can merge those all my hearts into one layer, and it'll take the name of whatever is on the bottom. So now we're going to do one more effect that really brings the watercolor look to life. But to do that, we need all of these, the splatters, the inky, and the hearts in one layer. So again, this might be one of those spots where I would swipe left and duplicate, so I could go back to that version if I wanted to. And on my new version, I'll merge those top 3 layers down and rename that inky or lettering, whatever you want. Now all I'm going to do is swipe left to duplicate that paper, hold, I'll use my finger, hold and drag it to the top. And now you can see if I toggle that on and off, how I now have that watercolor effect on top of my letters as well. But what I really like to do is play with my options. So if I come down here with watercolor, I usually always end up going to add. And you can see that took away my watercolor. I really like the effect it gives, but it takes away my background. So to fix that, all we have to do is tap clipping mask, and you can see my watercolor background comes back because that is confining it just to my inky lettering. So now everything has that nice watercolor paper texture and the effects all on, you just need to make sure all your artwork is on one layer for that effect to apply properly, is what I'm trying to say. I haven't had enough coffee yet this morning. Speaking of, okay, pause for a second, coffee break. Okay, so really we're done with this piece now. It's as simple as that. We are just using shades of black and grayscale colors to get that watercolor effect, and it can be super duper fun. Now our lines are pretty clean on the edge. In the watercolor lettering kit, I also included a wet edge brush. So if you wanted to get rougher edges when you're drawing your letters, you could be using that, and that's gonna give you, oops, wrong layer, more of a even more realistic kind of inky vibe because it'll be a little more imperfect. Let me show you down here. So let's say I make it even bigger. I'm gonna temporarily just take this out and show you a new one. So if I wanted, I do not want a clipping mask on that. So let's say, let's just draw a letter A. So you can see it has rougher edges. Now I'll apply that clipping mask. And then we haven't applied any water effects, but you can see how that gives you like a much inkier edge even, so you can play with that. And then the other thing is if you wanted to do a calligraphy version, you could, let's clear that layer. I'm gonna start with, let's see how this does. Make it a lot bigger. My Apple Pencil's been doing that a ton lately. It skips when I'm working, and I have not figured out a good solution despite a lot of Googling. So this one has the opacity built in, kind of like if you were working with a Tombow brush or something like that and applying a watercolor effect. So this one can get really fun if you are doing colors, but you could also do it with the black. And if you want it to be darker in the variation, just swipe left, duplicate, and that can make it even darker. You can tap the end to mess with the contrast. And of course, we wouldn't want to leave it like this. We'd want to go through all the same steps we did earlier in this process to create a piece that looks more realistic like that. But those are just some of the options in the brushes. I have a full course on creating pieces like this. I can show you real quick here. If I scroll down, I have way too many pieces on my iPad. The watercolor lettering kit. In the course, I will show you how to make a piece that says drink more water, but I show you exactly what I do to get that effect with all the bright colors, and we go through really in-depth step-by-step. And this was kind of my brush breakdown to show you different things you can do. That's a colored piece I did with the gradient brush. And I was gonna say, oh, this is the piece we make together in the course. And I also show you We talk about copyright things. I show you how to turn it into a sticker, which you can have printed and then apply to a water bottle. I show you how to put things on mock-ups like this. We go through the sketching process. So if you want a really in-depth course on how to use the watercolor brushes, that is in my shop. And I hope you enjoyed this variation on it. I think it's really fun to do some things in just black and white. So that is it for this month. And I know I was really late in the month, but moving has just been taking over life as it tends to do. So I hope you enjoyed this month's tutorial. If you post it, tag me at @ByDonNicole. I would love to see it. And I will see you next month.